Hello everybody, welcome to Retrogaming Superleagues. I'm Brian, also known as UK Jane Zoidberg, and in this series I like to take a selected category of games and then rank all of the ones in it that I have played. So that's what I'm doing here. This is a much requested video that I'm doing on for this one. This category that I'm going to be talking about today is the arcade platform games on the Amiga. Now there is a whopping 55 games in this category, so I think rather than just sit here and waffle and do an introduction, I'm just going to get on with it. Okay, as always, I'm going to be ranking all of the games in this list in one of the 5 categories that you can see here. We're going to have essential, recommended, good, poor, or rubbish. As I said, all of the games here are ones that I have played, so if there are games that are missing, then the chances are I haven't played them, or in some cases I might not have even heard of them. Either way, please let me know in the comments of ones that you think I should have included and where you'd have placed these games yourself. First game we have is Axels' Magic Hammer, which came out in 1989, published by Gremlin Graphics and developed by Core Design. And this is a pretty blatant attempt to make an Amiga version of Alex Kidd, but unfortunately it lacks the charm of the game that inspired it. The graphics are very similar to another Core Design developed title that came out around the same time called Impossible, which I did mention on a previous Super League, but this game is a lot better than that one, it must be said, although it's still not great. So let's kick things off by putting that one into the poor category. Next up we have Blob, which came out in 1993. This one is once again from Core Design, but this time it was also published by them. And this is a game where you play, as the title suggests, a little blob, and you have to bounce around levels and collect everything and get to the exit. Everything is viewed from above rather than side on, and that makes for some neat 3D effects as it zooms in and out. But unfortunately it falls foul of the hardware limitation, as it definitely would have been a lot better if you could see more of the level. They also could have livened up the graphics a little bit with a little bit more colour, as the black backgrounds on every single level don't really do the game any favours. It's definitely not a bad game, so I'm going to put this one in the good category. Next we have Bomb Busters, which came out in 1988, developed by Euroline and published by Readysoft. This is an utterly inept Bombjack clone with pretty much no redeeming features. The graphics are awful, the gameplay is awful, it moves really slowly, the sound is virtually non-existent. There is absolutely no reason to play this one whatsoever, so this one is going to be our first game to go in the rubbish category. Next we have Bomb Fusion, which came out in 1989, developed by PAL Developments and published by Virgin Mastertronic. This looks fairly entertaining when you first load it up, but unfortunately I found that it was incredibly difficult to work out what you were actually supposed to be doing. Trying to work out what your objective actually is makes playing the game more of a chore than it should be. Although the graphics are initially appealing, they do ultimately end up being a little bit messy, as they're perhaps a little bit too colourful. So this one I'm probably going to put in the rubbish category as well, but it's definitely better than Bomb Busters. Next up we have the official arcade conversion of Bombjack, which was published by Elite Systems and developed by Paradox Software in 1989. Now I remember playing the Spectrum version of Bombjack, which was also by Elite, and absolutely loving that one. That was probably my first experience of playing Bombjack. I mean, these days it's one of my favourite arcade machines ever. So considering how good that Spectrum version was, this was a major disappointment for me, as everything just moves way too slow. I mean, it's colourful enough, the level layouts are a fairly accurate representation of the arcade original, but there's simply no way that I can recommend you play this one, so I'm going to stick this one in the poor category and I'm going to put it above Axels' Magic Hammer. Now we come to Bombjack Beer Edition, which came out in 2018. This was released by Geezer Games, developed by McGeezer, and this is a practically arcade perfect conversion of, as I said before, one of my favourite arcade machines ever made. The only real differences are things that somebody who is as familiar with the original as myself would really be able to tell. It's fast, it's smooth, it's playable, it's everything that you would want Bombjack to be, so therefore I am going to place this one in the essential category. Next up we have Bobble, which came out in 1988, developed by Software Creations and published by Firebird. The programmer of this one, David Broadhurst, actually went on to make Assassin for Team 17 many years later. This was one of the first games that I ever played on the Amiga, and it was always one that we loaded up whenever some friends came round. Absolutely loved playing this one in 2-player mode, and playing it single player is pretty decent as well. As an example of how good an arcade conversion on the Amiga can be, this is one of the games that you would always wheel out and say, well, there you go, that's how you do it. So this one is also going to go in the essential category, but I think I'm going to put it underneath Bombjack Beer Edition. Next up we have Bubble Dizzy, which came out in 1992, developed by Optimus and published by Codemasters. Although it's credited as being developed by Optimus, this was actually programmed by Derek Lee Gilchrist with graphics by Lee Christian, the same people who made Magic Land Dizzy and Dizzy Prince of the Yokefolk. And this is a game that would make for an excellent mobile game in today's market, and I don't mean that as a negative. What holds it back a little is the fact that the random nature of the gameplay is both a blessing and a curse, as it makes it something that you can replay over and over again, but at the same time makes it annoying when you can't reach the top through no fault of your own. Not a game that you're going to play for hours on end, but a really entertaining one for the time that you will spend playing it. So I'm going to put this one in the recommended category. Next we come to Captain Dynamo, which is the same programmer and graphic artist as Bubble Dizzy, and I covered this one on the re-review only a couple of months ago. So if you want to know my full feelings about this game, I would encourage you to go and watch that episode. This is a entertaining, upward-scrolling platform game. Not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but it is quite enjoyable. Unfortunately, it has no sound effects, but the music is good. The only thing that I didn't really like was the slow movement of the character and just how far back some of the checkpoints are. So this one's going to go in the good category, but I am definitely going to put it above Blob. Next we come to Carve Up, which came out in 1991, published by Core Design, programmed by Rob Toon. This is very heavily inspired by the arcade game City Connection, I think it's called, where you control a car that can't stop driving along platforms, with the objective being to essentially fill them all in and avoid all the enemies. As Amiga games go, this was one that I played quite a lot when it originally came out, as it's got a level of charm that you don't find in a lot of games. It's also pretty addictive, despite the fact that the gameplay doesn't really have a whole lot of variety. But this one I think I am going to put in the good category as well, and I think I'll put it above Captain Dynamo. Next up we have Charlie Chimp, which came out in 1993, published by Europress. This one also came out as a cover disc on Amiga format, I believe. And it has also been followed by 2 sequels, which I haven't played, but although from what I've read, they aren't that different to the first one. This is kind of like a cross between what I said about Carve Up, with you having to fill in the platforms, and something like Rodland, but it's not really as good as either. Smacking the enemies with your tennis racket is pretty entertaining, but unfortunately it knocks them into places where you can't really get past them. So it's a little bit frustrating. And I also found that because you have to go over the platforms 2 or 3 times in order to complete the level, it made the levels go on a little bit too long. But it's certainly not a bad game. So I think I am going to put this one in the good category as well. But I'm going to put it at the bottom below Blob. Next we come to the Amiga version of Chucky Egg, which came out in 1989, developed by Icon Design and published by Pick and Choose. This was a game that I played a lot on the 8-bit systems, and I really enjoyed it. It was there were a lot of platform games like this on the back in the days of the Spectrum, and I also remember playing it on the Dragon 32 of all things. But on those systems, this was a great game. Unfortunately, this is not a great version of it. It's very disappointing. The controls aren't very responsive. It doesn't really move quickly enough either, and the jumping is really annoying. So I am unfortunately going to have to put this one in the poor category, but I think I will put it above Axels' Magic Hammer. Now we come to Chucky Egg 2, which came out the following year, 1989. Same developer and publisher as the original. But unfortunately, this is an absolutely appalling sequel. It requires pixel-perfect jumps to get over the enemies, which quickly become very frustrating. It's also a completely different kind of game to the first one. Whereas on the first game, all the levels were essentially a single screen. This one sees you having to go from screen to screen, collecting items and using them in the right place, and it does not work in the slightest. Why the game doesn't pick up items automatically when you touch them is a baffling decision on the part of the developers. Frankly, I hope I never have to play this game again, ever. So I'm going to put this one right at the bottom of the rubbish category. Next up, we have Cool Croc Twins, which came out in 1991, published by Empire Interactive. And this is a game that was actually developed using Amos, but the publisher thought that it was so good that they decided to give it a full retail release. And I must admit that it is pretty entertaining as you run around the levels and while trying to hit the switches and turn on all the lights so that you can leave the level. What was a little bit annoying is the fact that the controls reverse whenever your character goes upside down, and that really does take some getting used to. But it's a fairly entertaining game, I must admit. I did quite enjoy this one. Not quite enough for it to go in the recommended category though. So I am going to put this one above Carve Up in the good category. Next up we have Crazy Seasons, which came out in 1992 from developer Proxima Design and published by Idea Software. This is a game that looks pretty nice, with nice characters and clearly laid out levels. Unfortunately, the gameplay is incredibly frustrating. The idea is that you have to line up a series of blocks at the bottom of the screen so that you can then move on to the next level. And unfortunately, enemies can sit in a place on screen that makes it impossible for you to do this without dying constantly. And that, unfortunately, pushes it down into the poor category. So I'm going to put it down there, but I am going to put it above Bombjack. Next up, we have Ed the Duck, which came out in 1991, from published by Impulse, the full-price arm of Zeppelin Games. And this is an annoyingly decent Rainbow Islands clone with bright, colourful graphics and decent music. And considering the subject matter, that's incredibly annoying. Ultimately, the lack of any sound effects does hurt it though, as do the unresponsive controls. So not good enough to go any higher than the good category, and I think I'm going to put this one below Captain Dynamo and also below Blob, I think. Next up we have Eric, published in 1992 by budget publisher Atlantis Software, and this comes from a developer called Confused Pelican. This one is actually also available on Antstream if you wanted to play it, although to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't recommend it. It's a pretty basic jumping game where you control a knight, with the objective being to collect as much treasure as you can, collect the key and exit the level, and that's it. Okay for a budget game, but not groundbreaking. But I am going to stick this one in the poor category, and it's definitely better than Chucky Egg. Is it better than Bombjack? No, it's not. I'm going to put it below Bombjack. Next up we have Flimbos Quest, which came out in 1990, published by System 3 and developed by a team who would go on to be called Euphoria and make Disposable Hero many years after this. And this is one of those games that was converted from the Commodore 64 to the Amiga, like a lot of System 3 titles, where the C64 version is actually the better version. So if you are going to play this game, I would play that one instead. The Amiga version puts far too much effort into the graphics and not enough into the gameplay. What I didn't like about it is the fact that it can take too long to find the specific enemy that you need to find, as there's no on-screen indicator telling you whether you should be going left or right to find it. So sometimes it can take 5 or 10 minutes to actually locate the character. The music's good though. But for me, this one's going to go in the poor category as well, but I think it's better than the games that are in there already, so I'm going to put it above Crazy Seasons. Next up we have Fuzzball, which came out in 1991, also published by System 3, but this is from a Norwegian developer called Scan Games. It's got nice colourful full screen graphics and a funky toe tapping tune as you're playing it, but that's about it really. The movement is generally too slow and the controls don't respond to what you're pressing half the time, and that really started to wind me up after a while. So this is also going to be a game that I'm going to put down in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put it underneath Flimbos Quest. Next up we have Glasback 2, The Dole Years, released in 1992. This was a public domain title that you could get through 17-bit software. It's not a great game at all, really. The character movement is way too slow. After you've made your way around the level, avoiding the enemies and turning everything off, the game doesn't even highlight to you where the exit actually is, and I didn't really enjoy playing this one at all. So for me, this one's going to go in the rubbish category, and I think I'm going to put it above Bomb Fusion. Next up we have Gnome, which came out in 1991, published by Linnell. and developed by Vision Software, the people who would go on to make Seek and Destroy, although this game is nowhere near the same caliber as that one. The aim of the game seems to be to collect a certain number of diamonds before the enemies do, and you obtain those diamonds by growing them from mushrooms. It looks pretty nice and the controls are responsive, but the gameplay ultimately suffers from a serious lack of variety and challenge. So I'm going to put this one at the bottom of the good category, below Charlie Chimp. Next up we have Hammerboy, which came out in 1990 from Dynamic Software, and this is basically an Amiga version of those old Game & Watch style games, but with some truly awful graphics. The idea is that you have to fend off the increasingly frantic attacks against the clock in order to progress and make your way through the levels. Everything about it screams rubbish, but there's always been something addictive about this type of game, so that's going to elevate it into the poor category, but only just. So I'm going to put this one below Axels' Magic Hammer. Next up we have Happy Monster, which came out in 1994, and this is a game that is very similar to Fuzzball, but it doesn't suffer from any of the problems that game had. It plays a lot faster and smoother, and it doesn't have any of the annoying difficulty spikes, but ultimately I don't think it's going to be a game that you're going to play for a very long time, so that's going to keep it in the good category, and I think I'm going to put this one above Ed the Duck. Next up we have Huckleberry Hound in Hollywood Capers, which is one of many Hanna-Barbera licenses published by Alternative Software, and to be perfectly honest, I don't think any of them were good. This is a woefully basic collect 'em up, where the only notable feature being that it stars a recognisable character. Alternative snapped up the licenses to many characters like Top Cat, Yogi Bear and Hong Kong Phooey, and they churned out rubbish games like this for every single one of them. It feels like the developers put very little effort into the game to make it in any way enjoyable. It doesn't even have a jump animation for the main character. This one is going to go right down in the rubbish category, and I think I'm going to put this one below Glassback 2. Next up we have Ice Runner, which came out in 1991 from Magic Soft. And this is a pretty decent Lode Runner clone, although it is held back by a few frustrating quirks and glitches. Having to restart entire levels every time you die was incredibly annoying. It seemed like there was only one route around all the levels. The third level in particular is so full of glitches that I found it actually impossible to complete it. And I tried all 4 of the versions that I downloaded off the My Abandonware website, and they were all the same. I don't know if this is a quirk of playing it on the A500 Mini or on emulators, but it was very disappointing, as other than that, I did quite enjoy it. Those glitches are what are going to relegate it into the poor category, and I'm going to put this one above Crazy Seasons. Next up we have Incam Man, which came out in 2021 from a developer called Amiton. You can get this one from their website, and I'll try and put a link to that one in the video description. It's a pretty fast moving and enjoyable game with somewhat repetitive gameplay, but it's saved by a nice variety of enemy types that you'll encounter and have to deal with. It's also got a couple of excellent 2-player modes, one where you work with and one where you work against a friend on the single screen. It makes for some really entertaining gameplay, so I think I am going to put this one in the recommended category, but I'm going to put it below Bubble Dizzy. Next up we have Kid Gloves, which came out in 1990, developed by Logotron and published by Millennium. This one feels like a game that I played on 8-bit systems, but it did only come out on the Atari ST and Amiga, which is really bizarre, as the gameplay feels really basic. Presentation wise, the graphics are okay, but the sound effects do elevate it and make it more enjoyable than it would have been otherwise. There's not an awful lot to it though in the end, and and absolutely don't go playing this one if you've only played Kid Gloves 2, as the 2 games are completely different to each other. Hence the reason why you won't find the second one in this list. So I'm going to put this one in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put it below Bombjack and above Eric. Next up we have Liquid Kids, which was being developed in 1991 by Ocean France, but it actually ended up never being released. And when you consider how bad some arcade conversions on the Amiga are, naming no names, not releasing this one seems like a very odd decision indeed. It's a pretty decent interpretation of the Taito arcade original, and the way that you can use bubbles full of water as both a weapon and a tool makes for some pretty versatile gameplay. It's not as good as the work that Ocean France did on Toki, but it's definitely still one that I would recommend that you play. So I'm going to put this one in the recommended category, and I think I'm going to put this one above Incam Man. Next up, we have Magicka, which was converted from an Amstrad game that was actually made in 2016. And it's not a game that I had ever actually heard of before I started to put together this list. And it's a real undiscovered gem. The difficulty scales up nicely with new enemy types being added every few levels. It actually allows you to start game from any of the levels that you've reached previously with the number of lives that you had when you got there, and that's a really nice touch. It supports 2-button joypads as well. The only thing that's really missing is the inclusion of a 2-player mode. And it's maybe a little nitpicky, but I thought that the levels needed to end a little bit quicker after you defeat the last enemy. But those are the kind of problems that you start noticing because the rest of the game is good. So I am going to put this one in the recommended category, definitely. And I think I'm going to put this one above Bubble Dizzy. Next up, we have Magic Boy, which came out in 1993 from Empire Interactive, developed by Blue Turtle. And the first thing that strikes you about this game is that it's got excellent colourful graphics, coupled with well-designed levels that you can play through in any order that you like. Some of the power-ups do have a negative effect on the gameplay, which is never something that I've liked. And despite the cuteness of it all, some people may be put off about the idea that you catch animals in a sack and then have to drop them off the bottom of the screen, and the way that the sack wriggles after you've collected them. Like I say, some people may find that a little bit too much. I found it to be on the whole a pretty entertaining game though, so I am going to put this one in the recommended category, and I think I'm going to put this one below Incam Man. Next up, we have Manic Miner, which came to the Amiga in 1990, and there's no denying that Manic Miner is a classic of its kind, but the graphical overhaul that it received on 16-bit systems really does the game no favours whatsoever. I found that the level designs don't really work well if they aren't on a single screen, and the way that it scrolls around is a little bit too slow. And for some reason, the developers of the 16-bit version decided to include collectibles, which adds nothing whatsoever to the gameplay. One thing that is a definite plus though is that this game does include the original 8-bit version on the disc as well, so you could just play that one instead. As far as the Amiga version is concerned, this is going to go right down at the bottom of the good category, and I think I'm going to put this above Gnome. Next up, we have Max Knight, which is from a developer called Pixel Nation and came out in 2017. This one is also available from the company's website, but to be honest, it's hard to believe that this game came out so recently, as it makes a lot of mistakes that modern games of this type simply wouldn't. Being unable to finish a level, for example, just because you took the wrong route around it is just bad game design. It also feels like the game is unfinished, as it's got a few too many glitches getting in the way of any chance that you had of enjoying it. So for me, I'm going to put this one in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put this one below Chucky Egg. Next up, we have Mighty Bombjack. This was also published by Elite Systems, and it seems like it's an attempt to give gamers more, but this is a sequel that doesn't seem to understand what the appeal of the original exactly was. Like the Amiga version of Manic Miner, the introduction of scrolling to the levels is a really bad idea. Bad ideas I could live with though if the gameplay was any good. Unfortunately, Bombjack is a game that requires ultra tight controls to work properly, and this has some of the most unresponsive controls I've ever tried. On more than one occasion I had to hammer the fire button 2 or 3 times before the game would actually jump, and that for me is a complete no-no, and that's going to put this game in the rubbish category, and I'm going to put it below Huckleberry Hound. Next up, we have Monster Business, which came out in 1991 from Eclipse Software. I actually reviewed this one in the same issue as Alien Storm, which is the game that I covered on this week's re-review. And I always enjoyed this one because the idea of pumping up the enemies like balloons and then batting them away was always a fun one. I can't, however, put this one too high up the list, as the gameplay has got a few too many annoying quirks that get in the way of your enjoyment. Because of how your character's weapon works, sometimes if there are 2 enemies that are stood too close to each other, the game will shoot the wrong one, meaning that the one that you wanted to shoot will actually then just come across and kill you while you can't defend yourself. It can be entertaining as a 2-player game though, and that's going to stop it from going down into the poor category. So this one's definitely going to go in the good category, and I think I would rather play this one than Charlie Chimp, and probably more than Ned the Duck as well, for that matter. Next up we have Mousetrap, which came out in 1987 from Tynesoft, published by Microvalue. And this is a really basic Manic Miner clone with very little to recommend it. You control a mouse and have to make your way around the level and collect everything and get out the exit. But enemy movement patterns and the way that you can die from falling too far without it being easy to work out what's too far and what's not is really annoying. And so for me, I'm going to put this one in the rubbish category as well. And I think I'm going to put this one below Mighty Bombjack. Next up we have a game called Naughty Ones that came out in 1994 from Melon Design, published by Interactivision. Although this is a game where you essentially make your way around a level, it ends up falling into this category by having each screen be an individual challenge where you can try and score more points by killing the enemies in the correct order. It's got loads of levels with multiple screens in each, and learning the patterns of the enemies in each one really does encourage you to keep coming back and trying to play it over and over again. It also looks really nice. Movement is all super slick, and the controls work brilliantly. So I'm going to stick this one in the recommended category, definitely. And I think I'm going to put this one above Bubble Dizzy. Next up, we have the Amiga version of the New Zealand story, which came out in 1989, published by Ocean Software and developed by Choice Software. And this is a really accurate conversion of the arcade machine. It's got a lot of the secrets that the arcade original had, so the developers have clearly played the original quite a lot before they set about making this one. Unfortunately, because it's a home computer version, it has to have loading pauses, and the loading screens that appear between levels really do break up the flow of the gameplay. So that for me is what's going to hold it back from being in the essential category. But it's definitely a recommended title, so I'm going to put this one above Liquid Kids. Next up we have a game called Obstacle, which came out in 1995, and it's obviously cool because it's Obstacle with a K rather than a C. This is a shareware title that was available from F1 Licenseware, and I've got no idea why the game has a Christmas theme to it. The idea behind the game is a simple one. You have to bounce around the levels and collect everything before the time runs out, but unfortunately the execution is absolutely appalling. It's got some of the worst controls that you could ever imagine, and for me I found it to be virtually unplayable. So for me, I'm going to put this one in the rubbish category. But where? I think I'm going to put this one below Bomb Fusion. Next we have Out to Lunch, which came out in 1994 from Mindscape. This has got some really nice cartoon graphics with a really appealing central character. The idea of rounding up sentient food items is very entertaining. Every now and then a rival chef will appear on screen and try to scupper your plans, and that makes the action very fast, frantic, and very, very fun. If you play this one on the CD32, the game's even better, as it's one of the few games that actually makes use of the controller properly with the multiple buttons. So I'm going to put this one in the recommended category, and I think I'll put this one above the New Zealand story. Now we come to Parasol Stars, which came out in 1992, published by Ocean Software and converted from the PC Engine original. Just because this is the worst of the three Bubble Bobble games on the Amiga doesn't mean that it's also not really good as well, especially if you're playing it in two-player mode. The umbrella that each character has is a really versatile weapon, and it makes everything feel completely unique. The two things that I didn't really like about the game are the fact that the boss fights were a little bit too easy, and I didn't really like the levels that scrolled from side to side. The ones on a single screen were much more enjoyable. But neither of those flaws are things that will make this a game that you shouldn't be playing. So I am going to put this one in the recommended category as well, and I think I'll put this one above Bubble Dizzy. Next up we have A Prehistoric Tale, which came out in 1990 from Thalion. And what distinguishes these type of platform games from other platformers is the fact that they should be easy to understand as soon as you pick up the joystick. But this is a game that fails completely in that area. After every single level that I played, I received an on-screen message telling me that I had collected no eggs. Yeah, I collected everything on the screen, even the things that didn't look like eggs, and I still got the message every single time. So I really do have no idea what you are supposed to be doing on it. The graphics aren't great either. It has got a superb soundtrack though, so at least load it up once so you can listen to that. But I'm going to put this one in the poor category. and I think I'm going to put it down somewhere down towards the bottom. I think I'm going to put this one above Chucky Egg. Next up we have the Quest of Agravan, which was developed and published by Codemasters in 1992. This is kind of like a hybrid of Rainbow Islands and Ghosts and Goblins, but without any of the appeal of either of those games. I really do have to question whether anybody play tested this one during development, and if they did, why did nobody spot that being unable to see platforms below you was kind of important to the gameplay? They should have also pointed out that being unable to attack while jumping, even though you're holding a sword, means that you can't get past some of the enemies without taking a hit. This is the kind of release that gives budget games a bad name. So this one's going to go right down in the rubbish category, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Bomb Busters. Next up we have Quack, which came out in 1993 from Team 17, programmed and designed by Jamie Woodhouse, who also made All Terrain Racing. And if the last game was a bad example of a budget title, this is a prime example of just how good budget games could get. It's fast, playable and huge amounts of fun, with lots of secrets to discover on the levels, with one of the best 2-player modes that I ever played as well. If you do play it for a long time, then you will find that some of the level layouts and enemies do begin to get a little bit repetitive, but that's a very minor criticism, as is the fact that you shouldn't really have limited ammo for killing the enemies, as getting to a point where you can't kill the final enemy because you've used up everything is really frustrating. Still going to go in the recommended category though, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Bubble Dizzy. Now we come to Rainbow Islands, which came out in 1989, developed by Graph Gold and published by Ocean Software. This is a virtually perfect conversion of one of the best arcade games ever made. This is probably the game that I've played the most on my 800 Mini since I got it, as being able to program the controls makes it even better than it ever was back in the day. It's endlessly replayable, just like the arcade original. There's a reason that this was placed at #1 on the Amiga Power Top 100 more than once, and that's why I'm going to put it right at the top of this category as well. It's going to go right above Bombjack Beer Edition. Next up we have Rodland, which came out in 1991 from the Sales Curve, published by Storm. And out of all the games on this list, you'd be hard pressed to find any other one that raises a smile more than this one. Everything about the presentation is completely infectious. I defy you to not be humming the music for hours after you finish playing. And the gameplay, especially if you're playing it in 2-player mode, is a huge amount of fun, while at the same time being both challenging and addictive. As you can imagine, this one is also going to go in the essential category, and I'm going to put this one just below Rainbow Islands. Next up we have Slackskin and Flint, which came out in 1992 from Synergy Software. This is a really bizarre game, and probably the only game that I can think of where you control a 4-legged crocodile type thing. You jump around the levels as a kind of dinosaur rhino hybrid, collecting however many eggs the game tells you at the top of the screen. It's got pretty good graphics and a good catchy tune, but I couldn't really work out how you make the eggs appear. Everything seems to be random, and randomness in games like this is something that can get really frustrating, especially when it makes the levels take a lot longer than you feel like they should. Definitely going to go in the good category, because it's definitely not bad enough to drop down any further than that. But I think I'm going to put this between Charlie Chimp and Ed the Duck. Next up we have Smarty and the Nasty Gluttons, which came out in 2020, developed by Eero Tunkelo, hope I pronounced that correctly, and published by Bitmatsoft. This is a game where we're trying to work out what you're supposed to do. It did take a while, but once you do work out the mechanics of it, it's surprisingly rewarding to play, as you knock the enemies down onto each other to collect the keys and finish the level. The graphics are also pretty nice, with responsive controls. This one really was a genuine surprise. So I'm going to put this one in the recommended category, but I'm thinking I'm going to put it down towards the bottom, probably just above Incam Man. Next up we have Snow Brothers, which just like Liquid Kids is another excellent arcade conversion from Ocean France that was inexplicably never released. All that's missing from the arcade original is the 2-player mode, which is admittedly a pretty big loss for a game like this, but it's still great fun. The arcade version always suffered a little bit from being compared to Bubble Bobble, and that game is definitely still more enjoyable than this one in the long run. But thankfully, even though this game wasn't ever actually released, somebody did dig it up in 2006 and stick it on Amiga bulletin boards. So that's why you can now play it today, and I would strongly recommend that you do so. I'm going to stick this one just below Bubble Bobble in the essential category. Next we have Super Delivery Boy: The Holiday Shift, released in 2021 from Niso Games, and this is a really enjoyable Christmas themed game where you must deliver presents as fast as possible to the characters waiting at the top of the screen. The game all takes place on the same screen, and it's just a simple single screen score challenge which lasts for 100 seconds and nothing more than that. So only really the kind of game that you're going to play if there are other people around to challenge. Would definitely be a great game to stick on at a Christmas party with lots of friends there, but that's all really. I'm going to put this one in the good category, but I think I'm going to put this one below Ed the Duck. Next we have Super Methane Brothers, which came out in 1993. Notice I said brothers and not bros, because that's how it's pronounced. This was developed and published by Apache Software, and it's another Bubble Bobble style game where you capture enemies in clouds of gas and then fire them into walls to kill them. The gameplay is okay, but it lacks the depth of other similar games to this one. But I found the graphics to be really terrible, as they've got backgrounds that literally hurt my eyes with their garish colour schemes. So that's going to relegate this one down into the good category, as I definitely can't recommend it. And I think Cool Croc Twins is definitely better, so I'm going to put this one below Blob. Next up we have Super Seymour Saves the World, which came out in 1992, published by Codemasters and developed by Optimus. Codemasters were attempting to make Seymour the next Dizzy at the time. Problem being that both Dizzy and the Yoke Folk have bags of charm, whereas Seymour himself looks like a squashed marshmallow, sporting a grin that makes him look like he's got the personality of Jay from The Inbetweeners. It doesn't help that they shoved him into an uninspired and frustrating Bombjack clone. I mean, at least the developers of this demonstrate that they have an understanding of what Bombjack is, more than the makers of Mighty Bombjack did, but it's still pretty terrible. So I'm going to put this one at the top of the rubbish category, but still rubbish. Next up we have Tiny Bobble, which came out in 2020 from Abyss Corporation and released as a public domain title. And this is going to be a tricky one for me to rank, as unlike Bombjack Beer Edition, there's no real need for this one to exist, as the Amiga already has a great version of Bubble Bobble. This one though is pretty much arcade perfect. The music, the graphics, the sound effects, it's all here. And if you only play one version of Bubble Bobble, then you should play this one. Unfortunately, if you've already played the first one, there's no reason whatsoever to play this one instead. So still a great game, still going to go in the essential category, and it's going to go above Bubble Bobble, but only just, because it is essentially the same game. Next up we have Top Banana, which came out in 1992, and I can remember this one coming into the Games X office and everybody fighting to not review it. It's quite possibly the worst looking game that I've ever seen in my life, not just on the Amiga. You can barely work out what's happening on screen at any given moment, never mind where the platforms are. It's only the fact that they're a different colour that makes it so that you can actually tell where you're supposed to stand. It's more of a banana that's been left on the shelf of the supermarket and gone all mushy and brown than a top banana. So this one's going to go in the right down at the bottom in the rubbish category, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Obstacle. Next we have Top Secret, which came out in 1992, developed by The Hidden, who were the same developers that made Donk the Samurai Duck. But this is actually a much better game than that one, and that one was a full retail release. This one was given away on a cover disc with Amiga Power magazine. It's very playable, and it features a really catchy tune as you play it, even if it does ultimately lack a little bit of polish. It feels like a hybrid of at least 5 of the other games that are on this list, and it's definitely got some charm to it, but there are many games that you should be playing before you play this one. And I think I'm going to put this one down towards the bottom of the good category because it's not quite poor, and I think I'm going to put this one just below Manic Miner. And then for the final game on this list, we have Whiz and Liz, which came out in 1993, published by Psygnosis and developed by Lunatic Software. I've heard some people punish this game for being too easy, but I found that if you use the easier difficulty levels to learn what you're supposed to be doing, it makes it a much more enjoyable game when you do put the difficulty level onto hard to get a challenge. It's fast and frantic with action that's always smooth and playable. It's got a good variety of levels to play through, and you can play through them in any order that you want. And I found that all of the levels look excellent and are packed full of secrets. So this one I think I am going to put in the recommended category. Whereabouts though? I am going to put this one just below the New Zealand story. So there you go, that's 55 arcade platform games on the Amiga all ranked for you. This has been a much requested list, so I hope it's been worth the wait. It's taken me a long time to put this one together. If you've stuck with me right through to the end, then thank you for doing so. If you disagree with any of the placements of the games on here, then this is entirely my opinion and shouldn't be taken as gospel. Please do let me know in the comments where you'd have placed some of the games in here, and also anything that I might have missed. I'm going to be coming back in 2 weeks' time with another Retro Game Super League, but don't forget, we have the re-review of Jaguar XJ220 coming next Friday. If you want to watch that video early, then you can do so by becoming a VIP member of the channel. You'll find a link below as to how you can do that. So until next time, happy retro gaming. Bye for now.